In honor of the holidays, I last week spoke about peace on earth, and this week, goodwill to all. And last week we talked a little bit about really peace as a verb, something that one does moment by moment, cultivating this quality of heart. And I quoted a Christmas card that I had gotten many years ago that I loved the message of, which is peace and love begin with simple kindness, and joy to the world happens one heart at a time. Really focusing on the kind of very personal and dedicated qualities that one must have to really be wishing for peace on earth and goodwill to all. So I wanted to continue tonight and speak a little bit more about goodwill to all. And the Buddha in the Metta Sutta actually echoes this wish of the holiday greeting that I just quoted to you. And so I wanted to read to you a little bit about the from the Metta Sutta. And the Buddha says, this is the sublime abiding. And I love that phrase. Wow, we have a sublime abiding. We have something sublime to abide in. This is just a piece of it. He invites us to wish in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so also with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. Pretty amazing, isn't it? Pretty impressive, pretty strong. And for many of us, these words seem sort of like abstractions in a way. That, to actualize this really is, there's some being out there someplace who's more developed than I am, or maybe at some point in the distant future, that we will be able to actualize such an amazing thing. And we think of ourselves sometimes as being just sort of deficient or slackers somehow, often even coming to a gathering like this, how many times do we come and we sort of either directly or indirectly, we kind of look around the room and we think, well, probably pretty much all these people here are really better at this than I am, and better at this loving kindness thing and better at this meditation thing, and, that me, not so much. So that we really have a tendency to kind of think of this sort of practice as something a bit beyond us, and certainly a bit beyond me today. And especially at the holiday time, you could perhaps even contemplate, here we're about halfway through the holidays, and just how many times we have evaluated ourselves in one form or another as really not quite measuring up. Whether it's how we relate to the Iowa caucuses or how we relate to that thing that happened over the turkey, or how much turkey we ate, or just whatever it is, that there's often some way that we're not quite measuring up. And so what I wanted to talk about tonight was the Metta-sutta in relation to our sense of ourselves and all of the qualities that we have, the wonderful qualities, the maybe not so wonderful qualities. And the Buddha actually invites us in his teaching to start out, when we practice loving kindness meditation, to start out practicing it in relation to ourselves and to all aspects of ourselves. So I thought it might be a nice time when we think about goodwill to all, to contemplate the possibility that the capacity to offer goodwill to all actually begins with the capacity to offer goodwill to all aspects of our own being. I'm going to read the Metta-sutta again and invite you to contemplate as I read it, to contemplate applying it and directing it to every single aspect of your own being. The Buddha invites us to wish, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short or small, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being or any aspect of any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings, and indeed all aspects of all living beings, radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will, whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness. One should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. So we can wonder, wow, how do we do that? Where does one get this boundless heart from? Sometimes we can kind of think that maybe we were missing the day they passed those out or something. That it just seems, again, like such an impossible task. I ended last week with a couple of quotes, and I'm going to repeat them here tonight. One is from Andy Olinsky, who's a Buddhist scholar. And he's actually talking directly about the Metta-sutta here. He says, accessing what is good for you, implementing what is beneficial, accomplishing the noble purpose for which you aspire, achieving your wholesome goals. These can all be synonymous phrases involving a skill that can be learned. The text is telling us that whether or not we are able to experience that peaceful state is not just a matter of chance, nor is it dependent on the will of another or the benevolence of a deity. Rather, it is something we can learn how to cultivate, learn how to practice for ourselves. At other times, teachers speak of this quality of cultivation, that this quality of wholesomeness or goodness of heart is actually a quality of our awareness. It's a quality of our being. And any confusion about that is an obscuration that arises like dust on a mirror. And so the cultivation is actually a cultivation of remembering the goodness of our being and of not reinforcing the mind's tendencies toward judgment and blame and criticism and shame. This is the second quote. This is from the Dalai Lama. This is no easy task, and you must understand that there is no blessing or initiation which if only we could receive it, or any mysterious or magical formula or mantra or ritual, if only we could discover it, that can enable us to achieve transformation instantly. It comes little by little, just as a building is constructed brick by brick, or an ocean is formed drop by drop. Nor that what we are talking about here is the mere acquisition of knowledge. It is not even a question of developing the conviction that may come from such knowledge. What we are talking about is gaining an experience of virtue through constant attention, constant awareness, constant practice and familiarization, so that it becomes spontaneous. There are no shortcuts. And once again, he's not speaking here about adding something in. He's talking about learning to familiarize ourselves, learning to remember, if you will, the mirror, the goodness, this basic spacious awareness that we actually can touch into. We can even, again, through this holiday time, sometimes I was contemplating coming here, sometimes it's easier to just really reflect at moments like this when our hearts are somehow or other touched by generosity or care. And really we can touch into the quality of goodness of that. Maybe when we've given something that is really a true gift of the heart. Maybe when we've received something with a quality of openness that is a true gift of the heart. I watch a news program that ends every evening with a little blurb on someone who's making a difference. And it's so lovely. You watch all this news and you just kind of sink lower and lower into the cushions. And then the gladness of heart that arises when we touch into just, this goodness, which is actually like the tuning fork. It's sort of like my goodness tuning to that goodness. And indeed it happens apparently worldwide because they not infrequently will comment that, $200,000 worth of people have donated to that particular cause because people were touched by the goodness. And again, that's one goodness touching another goodness. It's not like imposing something or putting something there so much as waking it up. So when the Dalai Lama and Andy Olinsky are talking about practice and a skill, they're talking about learning how to wake up and learning how to remember. And learning how to remember our own goodness and learning how to remember those wholesome practices that contribute to that awareness and learning how to remember to not do practices that are not so wholesome. This is from John Wellwood. He said, most people in our society share a peculiar belief. We imagine that we should be able to establish a rich and satisfying relationship with someone that we love, even if we have never learned to relate to ourselves in a rich and satisfying way. We believe that a successful relationship mostly depends on finding the right person or doing the right things. We often don't see that how we relate to another inevitably follows from how we relate to ourselves. That our outer relationships are but an extension of our inner life, that we can only be as open and present with another as we are with ourselves. So it begins with a practice of our own hearts and minds, of relating to our own being with kindness and clear seeing, directing that kindness to ourselves, to this human beingness that's unfolding in this particular way. Not some other more improved version. We often think, I'll be kind to myself, tomorrow when I'm better or something. But the instruction actually is really offering kindness to the weak or the strong, omitting none. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. So that the Buddha isn't inviting us. He doesn't say, be kind, wish good things for people who are nice to you. And he similarly isn't saying, be kind to yourself only if you think you meet either your own or other people's expectations. At the same time, he's not inviting us to be narcissistic about it, to say, well, gee, everything I do is just peachy. But he's inviting us to notice what's wholesome and what's not so wholesome, and to include it all in our care and our loving kindness. Toward that end, a traditional Buddhist practice is really to contemplate our own goodness. It's actually something that the Buddha invites us to do. To contemplate our own goodness and to cultivate a sense of our own goodness. So that we reflect on things that we've done that are wholesome and skillful, on times that were difficult, that we really tried hard. So he invites us to contemplate our own virtues. I've read this before, but it's worth reading again. Here's what the Buddha has to say. He says, furthermore, there is the case where you recollect your own virtues. They are untorn, unbroken, unspotted, unsplattered, liberating, praised by the wise, untarnished, conducive to concentration. At any time when a disciple of the noble ones is recollecting virtue, his mind is not overcome with passion, not overcome with aversion, not overcome with delusion. His mind heads straight, based on virtue. And when the mind is headed straight, the disciple of the noble ones gains a sense of the goal, gains a sense of the Dhamma, gains joy connected with the Dhamma. In one who is joyful, rapture arises. In one who is rapturous, the body grows calm. One whose body is calmed experiences ease. In one at ease, the mind becomes concentrated. Mahanama, who's the person he directs this to, you should develop this recollection of virtue while you are walking, while you are standing, while you are sitting, while you are lying down, while you are busy at work, while you are resting in your home, crowded with children. So you hear a couple of invitations to us from the Buddha, and it kind of goes from two different directions. Remember, the Buddha teaches us the middle path. So on the one hand, he invites us to recollect our virtue, to remember goodness, to remember what it feels like in our bodies. So these moments where there is goodness that we manifest or that we receive, we really touch into it in our own bodies. So that's from one direction where we actually cultivate the skill. And from the other direction, that we cultivate the skill of awareness of holding any unwholesome qualities with great care, with great kindness, with clear seeing, so that we can see what's needed. So it isn't just recollecting virtues and everything else we throw away, but recollecting virtue as a kind of priming the pump and really knowing that in this human life and in this human experience, there are all kinds of ways that we are, in the Buddha's words, uninstructed worldlings. All sorts of ways that we fail to remember our own goodness, that we fail to remember the wholesome awareness, this spacious awareness that includes everything. In terms of remembering our own goodness, the Buddha invites us to place any unwholesome qualities in this larger recollection of who we truly are. So if you will, to remember that the speck of dust on the mirror is a speck of dust on the mirror. It's not who we are. In other places, he invites us to not identify with these arisings, with these qualities that arise, to see them clearly, to see what's needed, but to not identify with them, and to hold them in this larger awareness, much like in the meditation tonight, we held a larger awareness of maybe the sensations in our feet or our body breathing. So there was an awareness that was, if you will, larger than any particular sensation that we were experiencing. Here's the Buddha again. He says, suppose that a man were to drop a salt crystal into a small amount of water in a cup. What do you think? Would the water in the cup become salty because of the salt crystal and unfit to drink? Yes, Lord. Why is that? There being only a small amount of water in the cup, it would become salty because of the salt crystal and unfit to drink. Now suppose that a man were to drop a salt crystal into the river Ganges. What do you think? Would the water in the river Ganges become salty because of the salt crystal and unfit to drink? No, Lord. Why is that? There being a great mass of water in the river Ganges, it would not become salty because of one salt crystal or unfit to drink. So in that sense, really cultivating that quality of awareness and goodness that includes the unwholesome, but doesn't identify with it and doesn't focus it. Here's the Buddha. There's the case, this is another sutta, he says, there is the case where a certain individual is developed in the body, developed in virtue, developed in mind. Painful feelings cannot invade the mind and stay there when one is developed in mind. When one is developed in discernment, unrestricted, large-hearted, dwelling with the unlimited, a trifling evil act done by this sort of individual is experienced in the here and now, and for the most part, barely appears for a moment. You've heard me talk before. I have a friend who, at one time I was with a teacher who we spent a lot of time with, and he did something rather unskillful. And I was sitting in the audience, and I said to my friend Sue, I said, look at that, look at that. And she kind of leaned over to me in this very grandmotherly way, and she said, a momentary lapse, which was such a lovely frame on it, which was, of course, true. Here's this person who had just tremendously wonderful qualities, and it was indeed a momentary lapse. And so to think of these momentary lapses in ourselves with that same quality of kindness, seeing it clearly, it was indeed a lapse, so that we don't have to pretend otherwise. But he invites us to contemplate our virtues and to contemplate this sort of larger sense of awareness and holding. So it's beyond even my virtue. As we watch the news program and we touch into this kind of larger sense of goodness and generosity that we can awaken, if you will, in one another, and just delight in that. And then any unwholesome qualities become a momentary lapse, and we see them, and as the Buddha said in the earlier sutta, they don't remain. We see them, and we don't have to dwell on them, and we don't have to identify with them. We just see them. Ayakima gives the example of a mother who just cleaned the house, and one of the children walks in with muddy feet and makes a mess in the kitchen. And she says, you can see the mess and see the muddy feet and actually even correct the child, but it doesn't change your sense of who this child is, nor your care for this child. So the Buddha is inviting us with respect to ourselves to have that same quality of awareness of ourselves, to see the muddy footprints, but to have it not become, this is who I am, and not change our sense of care and kindness for ourselves. This is Ayakima. She says, Ayakima she died. She was a German nun, Buddhist nun, a saint really. She was a pretty amazing lady. She says, we can start with ourselves. If we can see our own mistakes and neither dislike them or hate ourselves for them, but simply see them and accept them, we may then resolve to change, which then takes time and practice. Those are my parentheses. We do not expect a 4-year-old to pass university examinations. We do not expect it to pass a 5th-year test. If we think of ourselves as ignorant children who need to grow up, who need time and gentle attention, then our mistakes are acceptable while the growing up process is taking place. Again, the Buddha repeatedly refers to us as uninstructed worldlings. I think it's such a sweet way. It's like we're just a little dopey, and we make kind of dopey mistakes, and to see ourselves in that way, and to hold it with a quality of kindness and care. So our practice then is we come here on Tuesday nights and we listen or we read books and are inspired, or that our practice actually is not just to listen and not just to read and not just to figure something out conceptually, but actually to contemplate how do I bring this into this moment's experience? Whatever this moment's experience is, whatever we find difficult. Whatever place where we find, well, surely the Buddha didn't mean I should be kind toward this. And we could remember that, yes, he did. Yes, he did. Ayakima invites us to ask the question, well, how am I going to do this? And she says that if we don't do that, then really all the teachings are for naught, unless we really bring it deeply into our own bones and into whatever this experience is. I was on a retreat a week ago for about a week, and I think I mentioned, actually it was 2 weeks ago now, I think I mentioned it. It was really quite a challenging retreat. Something very challenging had happened in my family just before I left, 2 days before I left. And I had never had such an experience of obsessive mind on retreat, where you sit and the mind just kind of launches into obsessing. So for 7 days I had this amazing experience of the comings and goings of obsessive mind. And it was really a lovely practice because it really was a practice of bringing kindness to this mind that was so obsessing. And in that way, trying very, very hard to help me figure out a way to navigate this difficult circumstance. So I could appreciate its intentions. It actually wasn't so helpful, but because I thought the same thoughts over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. But its intention was good. And so how to hold even obsessing mind in goodness. And one day I was doing walking meditation, and I had the thought, well, there must be something that isn't obsessing. And so I started to look through my body, and I found, my toes aren't obsessing. My toes are actually quite happy. So that there was just a little bit of larger spaciousness around the obsession. And then I started looking outside my body, and I looked out the window, and there was a tree, and I thought, well, the tree isn't obsessing. The tree is fine. And those birds that are singing, they're not obsessing. So that there was a much larger, much sweeter spaciousness around the obsession. And that's what the Buddha invites us to enter into, that we see it. And, the obsessing mind just kind of had its own little life cycle, and after a time it eased, and then it came back, and then it eased again, and then it came back a little differently, and finally it kind of wore itself out and eased. But it didn't stop, I'll tell you, by obsessing about how to stop my obsessing mind. That isn't how it works. So that to kind of cultivate this quality of spaciousness and kindness around whatever it is that isn't so wholesome in ourselves is really what the sutta is speaking about. This is Ajahn Chah, who is the he died also, who was the Thai Buddhist master, who is the grandfather, if you will, of the lineage in which we teach. He was the teacher for people like Jack Kornfield and Sharon Salzberg. He was one of the main teachers for them. Qualities, he says about this mind, he says, in truth there is nothing really wrong with it. It is intrinsically pure. Within itself, it is already peaceful. That the mind is not peaceful these days is because it follows moods, or if you will, it follows those specks of dust on the mirror. The real mind doesn't have anything to it. It is simply an aspect of nature. It becomes peaceful or agitated because moods deceive it. The untrained mind is stupid. Sense impressions come and trick it into happiness, suffering, gladness, and sorrow. But the mind's true nature is none of those things. That gladness or sadness is not the mind, but only a mood coming to deceive us. The untrained mind gets lost and follows these things. It forgets itself. Then we think that it is we who are upset or at ease or whatever. But really, this mind of ours is already unmoving and peaceful, really peaceful. Just like a leaf which is still as long as no wind blows. If a wind comes up, the leaf flutters. The fluttering is due to the wind. The fluttering is due to those sense impressions. The mind follows them. If it doesn't follow them, it doesn't flutter. If we know fully the true nature of sense impressions, we will be unmoved. Our practice is simply to see the original mind, if you will, to see the mirror, to rest in awareness, to see it all. So we must train the mind to know those sense impressions and not get lost in them. To make it peaceful, just this is the aim of all this difficult practice we put ourselves through. And when he talks about not resting in gladness or the difficult, what he's talking about there is not resting in the sort of gladness that we think, okay, no, I got just what I wanted, or, this cranberry sauce turned out just perfectly, or, this is the best pumpkin pie, or whatever it is that we think, now I'm happy, now I'm content, everything's fine. He's talking about not resting in those sort of sensory pleasures, or even in the sense of, my husband did the dishes, isn't that fine, I'm so happy. Those momentary pleasures that are really very contingent. He's talking about cultivating this capacity to rest in the larger gladness, if you will, and the larger sense of ease that is independent of circumstance, and that is independent of circumstance even when it is with respect to ourselves. In another sutta, the Buddha compares the well-trained mind to a steel spear, and he says, can you bend it? If I held a spear up, a steel blade, could you just come up with your hand and bend it? And, his followers said, well, no, of course not. And he said, in the same way, a well-trained mind just isn't bothered, if you will, by these comings and goings. That it doesn't, these comings and goings don't bend it, if you will. That we can continue to hold our experience, indeed hold all of our experience in awareness and kindness. And it won't be, if you will, bent out of shape if we can practice with that kind of care. In our psychologically minded Western culture, we actually tend to take a very different tack on this. In our psychological culture, we tend to think about fixing ourselves. And we spend all this energy on fixing ourselves. And we go to therapists and we read books and we do heaven knows what else to try to fix ourselves. And then when we can't quite fix ourselves, we think there's something wrong with us. Maybe I should be in therapy again, or maybe I should, go online and get that other book, or, practice meditation more, or something like that. But that we have this sense that somehow our human nature can be fixed. And that if we just try hard enough, it can be fixed. There's somebody someplace who is fixed. And if I'm not fixed again, there's something wrong with me. And it's actually an error in our Western culture that keeps us in a state of anxiety and dissatisfaction. Because this human nature, this humanness, actually can't quite be fixed. Sharon Salzberg speaks to this. She says we tend to get into some kind of punishing relationship with our minds and with ourselves, in which we practice intense criticism and self-deprecation, feeling that somehow these will prove to be a viable path to an improved life. We are disgusted by our fears, frightened by our desires, ashamed of our anxiety, and we struggle tremendously with our tumultuous, cascading depressions, other emotions. When we take a wrong step, we feel disgraced. When we fail to impress, we ascribe that to something unlikable and irredeemable within us. When we experience loss or pain or sorrow, we feel personally humiliated. We anguish over our disappointed expectations And we retaliate against our own minds by hating our lack of control, which transforms into hating ourselves. And when she speaks about cultivating this quality of kindness, this quality that the Buddha talks about in the Metta Sutta, she says we see, we touch, we experience the tension, the stress and the unhappiness of each extreme, and come to a completely different place that doesn't fall into either category. The extremes she's referring to there are either identifying and falling into that judgment, or the other extreme is as a way of trying to find some refuge. We don't notice that there's something unwholesome going on, that we've had momentary lapses, and we just choose not to notice, and we ignore it. She says we come to a completely different place that doesn't fall into either category. It is because we learn to love and care for ourselves that we move away from deifying any voice within that mocks us, humiliates us, and mercilessly puts us down. It is because we learn to love and care for ourselves that we apply intelligence and effort to having a better, happier life. And we are willing to go beyond what is merely familiar or convenient. Part of that revisioning process is to see our own anger and fear and depression and anxiety and jealousy and all such states as suffering, rather than as being bad or wrong or contemptible. Then we can have some compassion when we face these states within. So goodwill to all, and goodwill to all aspects of our own being, involves seeing those unwholesome states not as our own badness, but as our own suffering. Those states of tension, those states of dukkha, those states when I'm caught in obsessive mind or anxiety, depression, whatever it is, suffering. So that this is suffering. This is what the Buddha meant when he talked about dukkha. This is suffering. And can we hold the suffering when we can't, when I can't talk my mind out of obsessing? Can we hold the suffering with kindness and care and know that this is not who I am? This is not the nature of human life or the nature of my being. There are many, 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 many skillful means that the Buddha invites. I'll name a couple. Then I'm thinking the next talk I'll give, which is in a couple of weeks, I'll talk about relationships and maybe try to touch into the ways that in our relationships we really struggle with these sorts of things, and how hard it is sometimes to kind of rest and care in our relationships. So we can talk about that as a skillful means. But one of the skillful means is simply a practice of loving kindness. One of the skillful means is what I did with finding my toes and the birds and the trees. To really kind of look to see what's larger than this. One of the skillful means is contemplating our own virtues and really making that a practice. One of the skillful means is offering loving kindness to ourselves and to all beings. And even as we offer it to all beings, it's still a practice of cultivating kindness in our own hearts, so that we're not caught in the tension of ill will or hatred toward any being in the world. So to develop whatever skillful means that we have, to spend some time very deliberately and consciously reflecting, how can I be with this in a way that brings kindness and care? Whatever it is, whatever suffering we experience, how can I be with this in a way that brings kindness and care? And sometimes the quality of being with another person, and indeed I think some of the healing, probably a large part of the healing of seeing a therapist, is that sometimes the healing isn't so much that we fix ourselves, but we're able to be with another being who in this case can be with us with kindness and care when it's really hard for us to do that for ourselves. So that also can be a skillful means, to find another being who can just offer us some listening or care. So goodwill to all. Goodwill to all begins at home with all aspects of our own being. So peace and love begin with simple kindness, and joy to the world happens one heart at a time. So may the rest of the holidays be peaceful and loving and joyful in our own hearts. In our own hearts. Blessings.